From a pharaoh surrounded by 2,500 enemy chariots with nowhere left to run, to a single piece of metal so simple it ended 2,000 years of wars won by sheer number of soldiers, this is every ancient military innovation that changed warfare. And spoiler, every idea here got destroyed by the next one, and one of these empires falls, no joke, because of a poorly strapped shield. But first, let's go back 3,274 years to a place called Kadesh. Ramesses II, yes, that Ramesses, the guy with the giant statues and the ego to match, is leading the Egyptian army into what he thinks is an easy fight against the Hittites. It is not an easy fight. Ramesses gets ambushed, not by soldiers on foot, by chariots. Roughly 2,500 of them, carrying Hittite warriors with spears and bows, come screaming out of the tree line and slam into his camp before he even has time to organize a defense. His own division scatters. For a moment, the most powerful man in Egypt is basically alone, surrounded, one bad decision away from becoming a very expensive historical footnote. He survives, barely, and only because reserve troops show up at the last possible second. Egyptian propaganda later turned this into the greatest victory in Ramesses' career. He commissioned reliefs across Egypt showing himself single-handedly routing the entire Hittite army, which is the Bronze Age equivalent of posting the highlight reel and cropping out the part where you almost drowned. Modern historians look at the same evidence and go, "Buddy, you almost died." Kadesh is actually the earliest battle in history detailed enough for us to reconstruct troop movements, and what it reveals is simple. Whoever mastered the chariot controlled the battlefield. The chariot was the ancient world's first true weapons platform. 2 horses, a light wooden frame reinforced with just enough bronze to survive a collision without slowing down. 1 driver, 1 archer. It was fast, it was mobile, and for almost 1,000 years it was basically the ancient equivalent of an airstrike. Egyptians used it, Hittites used it. The Assyrians eventually built heavier 3-man versions, driver, archer, and a dedicated shield bearer, turning the chariot from a fast strike weapon into a mobile firing platform. Civilizations that had chariots dominated. Civilizations that didn't, prayed. But here's the thing about being on top. Somebody's always building the thing that knocks you off. Fast forward to 490 BC, on a plain called Marathon in Greece. The Persian Empire, the single largest, richest, most terrifying military power on the planet, has landed an invasion force on Greek soil. Athens has maybe 10,000 hoplites, citizen soldiers, farmers, blacksmiths, potters, who put down their tools, picked up an 8-foot spear and a bronze shield, and marched out to face what should have been a massacre. Instead, they win, decisively. Ancient sources claim the Persians lost over 6,000 men. The Greeks reportedly lost fewer than 200. That's not luck, that's a formation. The Greek phalanx was, on paper, almost stupidly simple. Rows of men, shields overlapping, spears pointed forward, moving as one solid wall of bronze and wood. No individual hero, no lone warrior charging in for glory. Just discipline. Just discipline. A wall that didn't break because breaking meant the man next to you died too. It turned untrained farmers into a machine, and for the first time in history, formation and cohesion beat raw numbers and elite chariots combined. And then, according to legend, a runner named Phidippides sprinted roughly 25 miles from the battlefield back to Athens to deliver the news. He said one word, Nike, victory, and collapsed dead on the spot. Rest easy, man. You invented the marathon and you didn't even stick around for the medal. Now here's where it gets personal, because the next great leap in warfare came from a man who was frankly falling apart while he built it. Philip II of Macedon, yes, Alexander the Great's dad, took the phalanx and made it worse in every way except the way that mattered. He swapped the 8-foot spear for something called a sarissa, a spear up to 18 feet long, too long to use one-handed, too long to hold a full shield. It looked absurd. It was a wall of spikes, 5 ranks deep, meaning an enemy facing the front line was actually facing 5 spear points before he even got close enough to swing a sword. But Philip didn't just build a better wall. He combined it with cavalry, skirmishers, and siege engineers, all moving together like pieces on a chessboard. Before Philip, armies mostly did one thing: After Philip, armies did everything at once, pin the enemy with the phalanx, then break them with cavalry hitting the flank. And the man building this masterpiece? He lost an eye taking an arrow at the siege of Methone. He broke his collarbone in one campaign and shattered a leg in another, leaving him with a limp for the rest of his life. He was, quite literally, falling apart piece by piece while assembling the most sophisticated war machine the world had ever seen. He never got to use it on his biggest ambition. He was assassinated in 3036 BC at his own daughter's wedding by one of his own bodyguards. His son inherited the army, the strategy, and the throne, and took it all the way to India. Philip built the gun. Alexander pulled the trigger. While the Mediterranean world was busy perfecting formations made of men standing shoulder to shoulder, a completely different kind of army was developing on the steppes of Central Asia, and it barely needed men standing at all. Steppe peoples like the Scythians and, later the Parthians, built the composite bow, a small, recurved weapon made of layered wood, horn, and sinew glued together under tension, capable of outranging a full-sized wooden longbow while being short enough to fire from horseback at a full gallop. Riders trained from childhood could turn in the saddle and fire backward while retreating, a maneuver so effective it earned its own name, the Parthian shot, which is where we get the modern phrase parting shot. In 53 BC, a Roman army of roughly 40,000 men under a general named Crassus marched into Parthian territory at Carrhae, expecting a straightforward conquest. Instead, a much smaller Parthian cavalry force simply refused to close in for a fair fight. They rode circles around the legions, firing wave after wave of arrows, resupplying from a baggage train of camels carrying spare ammunition, and retreating the moment the Romans tried to charge. Rome lost roughly 20,000 men without ever landing a decisive blow of its own. Crassus didn't survive the campaign either. Big mistake, Crassus. You brought a shield wall to a drive-by. The lesson stuck. Sometimes the deadliest innovation isn't a better formation. It's simply refusing to fight the battle your enemy wants. While Macedon was perfecting the phalanx, something quieter and arguably more important was happening in Italy. Rome, in its early wars, kept losing to a tribe called the Samnites, who fought in smaller, more flexible units in the region's hilly terrain, instead of one giant rigid block. So Rome did something most empires never do. It admitted its enemies had a better idea and stole it. Out of that came the Manipular Legion, small, independent units called maniples that could move, rotate, and reposition mid-battle instead of standing frozen as one giant slab. Add in the polem, a javelin engineered so the metal shaft would bend on impact, useless to throw back, and if it hit a shield, impossible to remove without dropping the whole shield. Add the gladius, a short stabbing sword built for brutal close-quarters work in a packed formation. It wasn't flashy, it was efficient, and efficient is exactly what let Rome absorb defeat after defeat and just keep coming back with a slightly better version of itself. Which is exactly what it needed, because its next enemy was about to hand it the single bloodiest day in the history of the ancient world. 216 BC. A Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca, a man who, as a 9-year-old boy, swore an oath to his father to hate Rome for the rest of his life, has already crossed the Alps with war elephants, which is objectively one of the most unhinged military decisions in human history. And it worked. At a town called Cannae, Hannibal faces a Roman army of roughly 80,000 men. He has around 50,000. On paper, this should not even be close. But Hannibal doesn't fight the Romans head-on. He does something no one had ever pulled off at this scale. He deliberately weakens his center, letting it curve backward like a bow under pressure, drawing the entire Roman force forward into what feels like a breakthrough. And while the Romans are pushing deeper and deeper into what they think is a collapsing enemy line, Hannibal's cavalry and flanking infantry swing around both sides and close the loop behind them. The Romans realize what's happening only when there's nowhere left to go. Picture it. 80,000 men packed so tightly together that many of them can no longer even lift a sword arm, crushed shoulder to shoulder in a ring of Carthaginian steel, with no room to retreat and no room to fight. Some Roman soldiers reportedly dug holes in the ground with their bare hands and buried their own faces in the dirt rather than face what was coming. What follows isn't really a battle anymore. It's a slaughter. Historians estimate Rome lost somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 men in a single day, the bloodiest single day in ancient military history, a number that wouldn't be matched by any Western army in one day of combat for almost 2,000 years. Nobody knew yet that this exact tactic, the double envelopment, would still be taught in military academies in the 20th century. German commanders literally studied Cannae before planning their opening moves in World War I. Hannibal won the single greatest tactical victory in ancient warfare, and he still lost the war. Here's the twist. Hannibal beat Rome on the battlefield again and again for over a decade. He humiliated their best generals. He killed tens of thousands of their soldiers. By any normal measure, Rome should have surrendered. But Rome didn't fight like an empire with pride to protect. It fought like an organization that could absorb catastrophic loss and simply rebuild, because its system, the legions, the manipular flexibility, the endless manpower of Italian allies, was built to survive exactly this kind of disaster. Rome lost battle after battle to the greatest tactical mind of the ancient world, and won the war anyway, because innovation in warfare was never really about winning one perfect battle. It was about which side could keep innovating after losing. Hannibal died decades later, in exile, hunted by Roman agents to his final hiding place in what is now Turkey. Rather than be captured, he took poison. His last words, according to legend, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear by the death of a feeble old man. Rest easy, sir. You won every battle that mattered, and it still wasn't enough." Hannibal died decades later, in exile, hunted by Roman agents to his final hiding place in what is now Turkey. Rather than be captured, he took poison. His last words, according to legend, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear by the death of a feeble old man. Rest easy, sir. You won every battle that mattered, and it still wasn't enough." Greek and Roman engineers took that idea and industrialized it, building torsion catapults and ballistae, machines powered by twisted rope or sinew coiled so tight it could launch a stone the size of a bowling ball, or an iron bolt the size of a javelin, hundreds of yards with enough force to punch through a shield and the man behind it. At the siege of Syracuse in 212 BC, Roman ships approaching the harbor were reportedly met with defensive engines so advanced, designed by the mathematician Archimedes himself, that Roman soldiers began panicking at the mere sight of a rope or a beam poking over the wall, certain it meant another one of his machines was about to end them. That's not just engineering. That's a reputation doing half the killing before a single stone gets thrown. And as the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 AD, its eastern half, Byzantium, was already sitting on one last piece of ancient innovation that would keep it alive for centuries after Rome itself was gone: Greek fire. A weaponized liquid, sprayed from tubes mounted on ships, that burned on top of water and could not be extinguished with more water. Enemy fleets that approached Constantinople sometimes simply burned on the open sea. The exact formula was such a closely guarded state secret that it eventually died with the empire that invented it. To this day, nobody has ever fully reconstructed it. That's the whole arc of ancient warfare in one weapon. Something built to protect an empire, so effective and so secret that when the empire finally fell, the knowledge just disappeared with it. Every one of these innovations, the chariot, the phalanx, the Sarissa, the legion, the double envelopment, Greek fire, followed the exact same pattern. Something new shows up, it dominates. And then, eventually somebody studies it, adapts to it, or simply outlasts it, and the cycle starts again. That's not really a story about ancient weapons. It's a story about how every advantage, no matter how devastating, is temporary. Rome didn't beat Hannibal by being smarter than him. It beat him by refusing to stop adapting after losing. That's arguably the single most important military innovation in this entire video, and it isn't a weapon at all. It's the willingness to lose and rebuild anyway. So here's the question worth sitting with. In a world that constantly builds better ways to win, is the real advantage ever the weapon itself, or is it always the side that's still standing to build the next one? Let me know what you think in the comments, because next, I think it's about time we talked about the man on the other side of that story, the 9-year-old boy who swore to hate Rome forever and nearly brought it to its knees. If you want the full story of Hannibal Barca, that video is coming next. And if stories like this, the ones where history stops feeling like a textbook and starts feeling like something you actually lived through, are your kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming.